Thank you for hitting play, and welcome to the series we're calling Data Pioneers. We're bringing together the brightest minds in the healthcare industry, supporting the transition to value-based care. We'll be highlighting the best practices, tools, lessons, and advice with a focus on data and analytics. I'm your host, Rich Waller from Wellstack, and we're very excited to have you join us today. Today, we're joined by Dr. John Lee from HIT Peak Advisors. Dr. Lee, really excited to have you on Data Pioneers.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, just to get started, maybe give us a little bit of your background, how you ended up in the healthcare industry and, kind of what you're passionate about in the space. Let's kick off there.
Well, now you're asking me to go way, way back. So actually, one of the funnier stories is that when I applied to college, I applied to 3 pre-med schools and I applied to 3 engineering schools. And all the engineering schools all rejected me, and all the pre-med schools accepted me, and so I thought that was fate telling me where I should go. But oddly enough, all my part-time jobs in college all centered around technology and computers. And even the one time that I actually got a job outside of that space and just did some pure research in an oncology lab, I was entering in data. I recognized that I was entering the same data over and over again. So I created a spreadsheet macro. And so the lab director walks by as I'm doing this. He sees all these flashes of screens, and then all of a sudden this like nicely formatted research data on a spreadsheet. And he said, "Wait, what was that you just did?" And I said, "It's a macro." And he said, "We don't do that here. You're not doing any more experiments. You're just doing that." So even when I wanted to do like research, it kind of pulled me back. And then fast forward years later, when I was actually practicing medicine, we were going live with an EMR. We were going fully electronic in the emergency department, and I got pulled in to be the IT person for that, and kind of grew from there to eventually being CMIO at a couple organizations. Now I'm still practicing medicine, but I'm also doing IT stuff kind of in parallel with that, doing my own
Very
consulting.
good. That's really, and it's always so great to, discuss and kind of collaborate with folks that have that, kind of deep practicing clinical background, but then have been, just either by passion or by interest, got into this, IT and tech side of things. So it's really great to have you today. In some of the conversations we've had, you made the statement that, most healthcare problems can be solved or addressed by good information delivery. Maybe unpack that a little bit on what you see that works there, and where do a lot of organizations fall short in your experience?
Well, it's really kind of epidemic. If you think about all the different problems that we have in healthcare, they can all be really boiled down to information delivery or poor information delivery. So the classic, most ubiquitous example is just the information overload that we clinicians experience. And we get inundated with so much stuff, it's easy to miss things, and it's easy to make mistakes because we're just overloaded. Our cognitive processes can't handle all of that. And so it's difficult for us to direct ourselves. And then on top of that, you have, I just had a conversation meeting earlier today where we were talking about error and harm reporting. If you think about the stuff that we have an opportunity to fix in healthcare, it's a lot of these error, harm, and waste workflows. And you may think, well, we report on that sort of stuff. Anybody who actually delivers healthcare will tell you that the actual error and harm events, especially if you also include a lot of the near misses, at least 90% of them do not get reported. It's only the most extreme examples that do. And if you then pull that forward, you realize that there is just an enormous opportunity, hidden opportunity, to actually improve our system if we actually had the data to figure out what went wrong. So, like as an example, I read Elon Musk's biography, and he was talking about, SpaceX and multiple rockets explode, and he never viewed that as a failure. Each one was a learning opportunity, and they just kind of iterated and upon all the different mistakes they made, and now look what they are.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do in medicine. We need to iterate and systematically identify the errors and the near misses and the friction points. And if we can solve those and identify them at scale and figure out where our best opportunities are, and then systematically make it so that it makes it difficult to do the wrong thing and easier to do the right thing, we can go a long way to fixing our healthcare system.
And you've used the phrase kind of seeing the invisible within EHR systems and helping others bridge those gaps that are, or helping bridge gaps that a lot of people can't see. You just mentioned one example. Maybe kind of unpack that a little bit, and then maybe in doing that, give us a little flavor on your work at HIT Peak Advisors. Kind of where you guys fit, where you guys play. That would be helpful.
So I use the analogy, the metaphor of that one scene in Airplane. Did I tell you about this in our conversation before? Do you know the movie Airplane?
Yeah.
So the scene where you have two African-American gentlemen talking, you can't understand what they're saying, and they have subtitles. The flight attendant comes by, but they're speaking English, ostensibly speaking English. The flight attendant comes by and is trying to help them. They can't communicate each other, even though they were both technically speaking English. And then Barbara Billingsley from Leave It to Beaver comes up and says, "I speak jive." So what I do is I speak IT jive to clinical and operational people, and I speak clinical and operational jive to IT folks. I am Barbara Billingsley, and it's amazing to me how often that disconnect occurs. That like I was in a recent project recently where we're trying to create this one report on some of the outcomes related to a clinical new lab test that we're trying to implement. And we're trying to find pieces of data, and the BI people were working on it, and they thought they had the right piece of data. And then I kind of joined in on the meeting, and I said, "No, you're looking in the wrong place, because people document things in a different place, even though it may not necessarily be intuitive. This is where you want to find the piece of data." So if I had not been in that conversation, they would have been swirling around for, I don't know, at least a few days, maybe weeks, to figure out exactly where that piece of data came from. That's just a small example. And there are any number of other opportunities, just even at the operational front end of clinical care, where clinicians just don't know what the system does. And then the IT and analytics people don't know necessarily what would help the clinicians. They just end up doing whatever the clinicians ask of them. And oftentimes the clinicians and operational people are anchored on what existed before. And quite frankly, if you pull the threads back, a lot of these the concepts and workflows are still based on paper and how they're constructed. So like a few examples of making dynamic order sets. People didn't know that we could do that. Creating dynamic pieces of information delivery and reports so that a clinician can see the things that are appropriate for that clinician, as opposed to just kind of an undifferentiated dump of data.
And how do you have any kind of processes or approaches that you use to kind of properly engage clinicians when you're either redesigning workflow or you're trying to apply technology? But I think you've used the phrase of paving cow paths, right? Like sort of leveraging new tools to sort of address outdated workflows. So you're sort of just like layering things on top of broken processes, which we see a lot, obviously, in the tech space. How do you kind of reconcile, other than obviously speaking both sides of the language gap? Is there anything you've found to be successful to kind of engage physicians, help redesign workflow in a way where sort of they're engaged and sort of have skin in the game, but yet you're applying the right technology for that process optimization?
I think if you just always reel it back to just first principles, what are you trying to accomplish? And oftentimes you have to do a little bit of, what is it, the five whys?
Yeah.
Well, what I'm trying to accomplish is, let me give you an example, an order set. We want an order set to address hip fractures for orthopedists. And then you look at the content and it just doesn't make sense because it looks almost exactly like all the other order sets. And then you say, well, why do you want an order set? And then there was a particular type of test that they were missing. And because they were missing that particular test, a lot of the surgeries were delayed. And said, well, why didn't you say so in the beginning? And we found a different solution that was actually easier to build, but the requesters actually didn't know that capability existed within the EMR.
Hmm.
So, if you try to keep it simple and always think about, well, what are you actually trying to solve? And I think if you talk to clinical informaticists, we fall back on that a ton, and oftentimes we'll get sucked into the swirl and then get caught up in the tool. And then if we hit our own reset button, say, wait, hold on, time out. What is it that we are trying to solve? And then go back to that first principle and then work from there rather than try to layer things upon tools or other familiar things that already exist that may not need to exist because we're in a different world right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Clayton Christensen coined the term kind of the jobs to be done framework, right? To kind of start with what is the actual outcome? What is the job? And then, if everybody's aligned on that, it becomes much easier in terms of the technology that you can apply. So I love that. I'm totally aligned. I think that's, the way to go. And still as technologists, it's often difficult to, really sort of engage with those clinical stakeholders, because there is a lot of there's kind of some ownership of those processes. If anything changes or you're trying to insert new solutions into those existing workflows, it does become a challenge, right? So I absolutely see the value of what you're bringing to the table there, with your
and
right?
to the point of the jobs to be done, I think oftentimes, and that order set example is an example of that, where oftentimes the requesters and the operational people will often conflate this tool that they're accustomed to using as the job to be done, and not the underlying more fundamental tool of the job to be done.
Yeah, actual job. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's shift the gears a little bit and talk about some of the newer innovative technologies. Obviously the big topic right now is ambient listening, ambient documentation. I think in prior conversations, you mentioned this as being a bit of a sort of relief. So it's an improvement, incremental improvement, but not yet truly transformational in how it's being used. Where do you think this technology could go? If it's used correctly, if it kind of starts to, do you think it will meet its hype? Talk a little bit about your thoughts in that area.
Yeah, so I think it clearly solves an enormous pain point. And I do think that it's quickly becoming table stakes for any clinician who's looking to work in any organization. I suspect that if you are an organization that does not have a plan for ambient, you will probably have a lot more clinicians who will say, sorry, I'm going to go down the road to your competitor that does have this sort of tool in place. Although I will say that surprisingly, as we've implemented this at my organization, it isn't the majority of providers who actually use the tool. I use it a ton, but still, I think the majority still use straight up front end dictation. It is gaining momentum though, and I do think that it is going to be a requirement for people who are looking for positions in organizations. The thing though is that it does solve a pain point, but it doesn't necessarily pay for itself. There's no specific ROI related to it other than just a strategically creating a better work environment, and you
Mm.
get more stickiness to the provider. Where I do think that it has potential is that when you have an interaction between a patient and a physician, and you have that verbal interaction, we encode a ton of stuff. ICD, CPT, there's RX norm, and all sorts of metadata surrounding labs and LOINC and all sorts of other things. But there's a ton of stuff that is not encoded.
Mm-hmm.
So the example that I use a ton is, let's say you have hypertension. I'm a primary care physician, and I keep seeing you come back with your blood pressure really high. And are you taking your blood pressure medicine? You say, yes, I am. Your wife is in the corner. She rolls her eyes, and you say, well, what's going on? No, he's not. He hates it. He doesn't like the side effects. So imagine if you could encode non-compliance and the type of side effects that the patient is having actually into the record as discrete data. And you would say, well, what good is that? I mean, you're going to have a conversation with the patient anyways. No, what can actually happen is that then if it's encoded into the database, you can actually scale that out, and you can do things like, for instance, metformin, one of the diabetic medication. One of the most common causes of non-compliance with metformin is gastrointestinal side effects. And the next sequence of events oftentimes is, screw it, let's put you on a GLP-1.
Mm.
Metformin is dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And we all know how expensive GLPs are. What a lot of people don't realize is that the side effects, these GI side effects that are associated with metformin often can be mitigated by just dietary changes. So imagine then if you could do a population health dashboard on diabetics teetering on the edge of not being compliant with their metformin, their A1C still uncontrolled, and it's mainly GI side effects. So then these are the 10 patients in our cohort that fit this criteria. Let's have them talk to a dietitian. And oh, by the way, let's actually buy their groceries for them for a month or two.
Yeah.
If you think about the cost of that,
Huge
compared
ROI.
to years of GLP, that's huge ROI.
Yeah. And in that case, I mean, how willing are you seeing, provider organizations that are not fully at risk to implement those types of things, right? Because
they're mainly interested in how do we boost our RVUs, how do we optimize our CPTs, how do we get the HCCs and the MCCs, and they do a little bit of hand waving for like readmission and that kind of stuff. But when you think about it, getting one or two extra hip replacements will pay for all a year's worth of readmission.
Yeah, it's wild. Let's go. This kind of going back to the ambient listening topic. You mentioned something, and for those listeners that maybe aren't super familiar with how that technology implements, and you mentioned that an organization having an ambient listening plan. Maybe unpack that a little bit. Like, what does an ambient listening strategy entail for those that maybe aren't quite there yet or thinking about it, or just, for those technologists that are maybe less familiar with exactly how that technology deploys? What goes into a rollout, a plan, and engagement strategy?
So I do think that it's probably worthwhile to actually do some sort of piloting, although I think the industry is rapidly getting past that point where it's just going to be part of the electronic workflow. It's going to be part of the EMR. And then the other thing to know is that it isn't just plug and play. You don't just turn on the technology and it works fine. There is some element of training going on, and you have to actually approach things a little bit differently when you have that interaction with the patient to optimize your output. And one of the interesting things is that I had a conversation with some colleagues about this, that one of the concerns is that you could, you lose that cognitive process, that if you go in, you have an interaction with the patient right now or pre-ambient, and then you sit down, you think about your note, and you kind of cobble it together, and that's part of your cognitive process. One of the things that I've noticed is that because the verbal interaction that I have with my patient alters the output of that ambient note, that cognitive process that I used to have when I was writing the note actually gets time shifted into the space where I'm actually having a discussion with the patient. So that I may in the past say, okay, you came in with chest pain, all your tests are normal. But instead, what I'm going to say now is, okay, you came with chest pain, your cardiac enzymes were negative, you have a very low risk profile based on something called the heart score, and you're 25 years old and you don't have any risk factors for a blood clot. So I would normally utter that sort of stuff in my dictation or my as I document, but now I'm actually having that conversation with the patient, which if you think about and if you do it right, it's actually better because then the patient has far more engagement and understands what your thinking is.
And I think that the places that this could go. I mean, obviously there needs to be some continuous improvement to the setup, the clarity, and kind of how that data is effectively captured and integrated. But I think that the opportunity could be absolutely tremendous for this technology to be sort of the new hub for the whole application ecosystem on top of it, right? Because if you think about, like you mentioned, the lost data that you don't get in just sort of like either a dictated or a data entry into an EHR, the softer side, the stuff that you don't pick up, if you were to be able to roll that in, leveraging AI on the data integration side to kind of sort through and create some of those dashboards that you mentioned that consider things like the GI dimension that only found out because you heard it from their spouse or maybe an aside comment. It's pretty exciting to think about the whole application ecosystem that could sit on top of that data input modality, and then maybe instead of the EHR, in a traditional sense, being the kind of the core only hub by which you can extend, you could put real-time application interfaces on top of that. That data entry point from and I know that there's probably some human in the loop aspect that has to happen for validation and everything still, but I do agree that there could be, there's a lot to be done still, but that could be a really interesting sort of new center of gravity for what a lot of, tech companies are programming against.
Right. And if you think about those sorts of things that are locked up in that verbal interaction that is not being surfaced right now, there's just an enormous preponderance, if not most of the opportunity is in social determinant stuff, like non-compliance or, I see you're not losing weight. Well, what did you eat for dinner last night? Well, I ate 3 Big Macs. That there's no place to put that, at least discreetly in an electronic record right now, other than the patient has morbid obesity, but there's no granularity to that. It's very unactionable.
Well, and if you extend that out to the patient's day-to-day interactions, and if they would be open to, like a lot of health systems are looking at, how do you create sort of better connections, into the system through an AI interface or a chat interface, or even interactions with the health system on the call centers and everything. And if you start to be able to have patients be able to, just verbally enter feedback into the system and on a even an ad hoc basis, you could really extend out the potential data collection on understanding what they're eating, what their patterns are, what their geographic limitations, from food deserts and everything else. And that could, I think, really improve the ability to capture that information more effectively.
Yeah, I had a conversation with some representatives from a company called Evidation, and they have something called the iceberg slide. And basically, it's just a massive amount of data that sits underneath the surface that could actually contribute to the patient's health and well-being.
Hmm.
but we only capture this teeny tiny bit at the very tip, and ambient documentation and basically scraping off some of these really useful bits that are currently hidden is one piece of it. Then you have other things like remote patient monitoring, and I think at a certain point you get a little bit creepy, but there's just a ton of stuff that we're not availing ourselves of that can actually
Yeah.
affect the
And
patient's
even
care.
if like a certain percentage of patients, we're open to opting in to, a little bit where it's not a difficult data entry problem, which you've had. That's been the biggest problem in the past, from my perspective with, you know, entering, your food and, kind of those applications that captured that information.
Hmm.
It's just tedious to enter it all,
Right.
right? I mean, I would love to see all that stuff captured, for my own patterns and things, but I've tried many times, and you get excited, you log your food for about a week, and then it's just like
Yeah.
you just after a while, it's like, but
Even
if
if yeah,
you
even
know,
if you used an LLM to like every
yeah,
time you eat a meal you take a picture, that still would be kind of painful.
it's
So
still work.
there
Yeah,
there are you have to pick the low hanging fruit, and there's
totally.
plenty of low hanging fruit.
And
Uh,
so if you think about it, regardless of the data ingestion, I think that, we're making great strides with, how we're capturing information through ambient, through other mechanisms. How do you see, how do you help systems, or what techniques are you using to, it's been the statement for so long that everyone has, information, or sorry, has data, but how do you make that, into actionable information so that you're actually moving the needle around specific initiatives around your data versus just, again, capturing more and more and more data?
so I've often used the metaphor of how people are talking about data being the new oil. The problem is that, let's say if you have oil, if you take crude oil and stick it in your car, it won't run very well, very far, right? You have to refine it.
Yeah.
And there's different types of crude oil. There's light sweet, there's heavy sour, and each one has a different type of refining process. But in the end, it all comes out as gasoline. And when you put gas in your car, you don't care if it came from Mexico or Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or the oil sands of Canada. It's still gasoline. And so that's one of the things that we have to do with the raw data that's in our system. We have to curate and process and make it highly usable to the end users so that when somebody says, I want to know about all the readmissions in our hospital, it's number one at their fingertips. They don't have to refine it every single time that they ask for it, and that it means what they think it means. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations, they don't. I think most organizations don't put a lot of time and effort into that.
Yeah. And kind of moving into the clinical informatics area, why do you believe that that's, potentially still an undervalued area in many health systems? And kind of how do you think about the not only the ROI, but the cost of continuing to sort of, undervalue that area?
So I have often talked about clinical informatics as like the old BASF commercials. Um, we don't make the products you buy. We make the products you buy better. So, we don't do the servers, we don't build the EMR, but what we do is we insert ourselves like that order set example. And instead of just saying, you've requested an order set, we'll build the order set, and then 3 months later be surprised that the problem still exists, we insert ourselves and say, well, why? And make that content. It's still the same EMR, but we can suggest a different configuration tool to actually accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish.
Mhm.
And I think one of the problems that clinical informatics has is that it can be a pretty substantial cost, especially when you have physicians involved, and the actual financial benefits are accrued by not the IT department or the clinical information. It's by the operational departments.
Yeah.
So the accounting and the ROI makes it a bit more difficult. And if you want to try to connect the two, it becomes kind of an accounting and project management nightmare. And so there's that friction that exists, and that's why it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So for other tech leaders in healthcare organizations listening in, what's an area or sort of one recommendation that you would have for, sort of an under the radar or an investment that you would recommend that they prioritize in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, next 12 to 18 months, I'm sure that LLMs and AI will be at the top of everybody's list. But I would contend that, and you'll hear a little bit of a theme in a lot of the things that I say, that if that they should put as much time or effort, if not more, into curating some of their data governance and their data elements, and really governing them well, trying to create a process where it isn't like overly cumbersome. You still need to move and function and operate, but at the same time have some discipline and have a reproducible rubric where you can create this underlying data purity, so that, number one, even at just the simple um, descriptive data layer, that becomes way more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, if you have that good data, all your AI and efforts become way more effective. Instead of having crappy crude oil sticking into your car, you have like 95 octane gasoline.
Well, and I would imagine, I mean, this is something we talk about at WellStack quite often, is that given the pace of the AI ecosystem and the application ecosystem, I mean, there's going to be a lot of change in that space in the next 2 years. I mean, there's going to be companies coming, companies going, companies coming in and growing very quickly, and I would imagine that it also provides some good risk mitigation to the health system or the healthcare organization if you have that kind of core trusted data foundation to run multiple experiments where you're not sort of hitching your cart to sort of one AI horse. You have that optionality so that you can extend data or connect data to a lot of different potential AI endpoints that could very well be changing or moving a lot during the next again, maybe in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So is there anything else that you'd want to touch on today?
I just want to, I do really want to reiterate this concept of this underlying foundational stuff, the data governance. And I find that a lot of organizations, when they look for insights or analytics, they have this habit of kind of recreating the wheel for each analytic project that they have.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about the different questions that are often asked, a lot of them are repeated concepts. They may be in different permutations.
Yeah.
You may have, diabetics with non-compliance. You may have hypertensives with non-compliance. You may have readmission, and on a particular in a particular scenario, you may have readmission with another set of data.
Right.
But if you do this right, and you put all this work in on the front end, you can kind of mix and match these things very reliably, and build them like almost like Lego pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And what a coincidence! This is the sort of stuff that WellStack does, right?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting that you use that analogy. I mean, it's something we do talk a lot about this, and you're right. I mean, so much of these different, I would say, AI applications, whether it's readmissions, whether it's gaps in care, whether you're looking at network leakage, being able to have that core centralized data asset that's got your EHR data, that's got data from your HIEs, or, an external ecosystem where you can see things happening outside the health system that are affecting those patients that you're, either trying to retain or you're taking risk on. And then the ancillary data, right? So the data that's coming in from the ERP, from your Press Ganey, from your Workday, like all that, into that centralized foundation, you can very, very quickly and cost effectively run, some of these AI pilots, and you can really start to, understand where there's opportunity for ROI. Where again, if you're reinventing the wheel with each new kind of AI relationship and having to factor and give data, and it's a lot of friction and a lot of cost that can be, I think, avoided and streamlined when an organization is willing to make that investment. So absolutely, I think it's a great point, and it's something that we certainly believe strongly in, because we're seeing in our clients, we're seeing a lot of the benefits of laying that foundation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that often happens with organizations is that they get kind of impatient. And if you think about this layer of highly curated data Lego blocks, that takes a lot of time and front end effort. But if you build that, then you end up moving a lot faster and more nimbly.
And I think that there's a way to kind of accomplish both those things. And what we try to talk about is, you start to lay that foundation, and you can lay it incrementally, right? And you can start to kind of connect those dots, pull through some value-rich use cases in the meantime. So you're not, having to go, spend 12 months setting a foundation before you can start, interacting with this, right? And there's a lot of ways and techniques that, you can pull through that value incrementally, but it's all with an orchestrated plan to, kind of create that connected ecosystem underneath it. And then, so you get a little bit of the benefit of some early quick wins, but you're really, driving towards that vision. So I agree. Sometimes it can be a little daunting to take on this type of foundation setting task, but I think with the right approach and right partnerships, you can kind of achieve, both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, one of my favorite phrases that I use a lot when I'm working in clinical informatics IT is the Navy SEAL phrase of what is it? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so if you go slow, you methodically create your foundation, you'll find that eventually you're just moving faster. It just happens naturally and organically, but you got to put that underlying foundation in first.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure today. Really great to connect as always. And just thanks again for spending the time today.
Okay, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks again.